Hello, Patriots. Welcome back to Doug's Democracy Den. Here in the Den, we like to talk about American government, politics, and current events. Every time we meet in the Den, we pay tribute to our country and our flag by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Feel free to join. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today in the Den, in our series on Understanding the Constitution, we're up to Episode 3, in which we're dealing with Article 2. Article 2 is where the founders of our country established the office of the presidency. The office of the presidency. This is the executive branch of government. Think about all the federal agencies you're familiar with, you interact with, the IRS, the military, all kinds of medical, all kinds of national parks, all kinds of things, federal agencies. All of those federal agencies are in what is known as the administrative side of the government. You know what that means? That if you put together a big flowchart of the federal government, all of those are administrative functions, and all of them report to the president. Every federal agency you can think of, every agency out there in the federal government is on the administrative side and reports to the president. That means the president, the office of president, is the chief administrator of the country. There are also a number of other duties which have been given to the office of the president. The president is obviously the commander-in-chief. That's a highlight of the job. Many people view it as. It's also a heavy responsibility. The founders intentionally designed that our U.S. military would be led by a civilian. That's why the president is the commander-in-chief. They wanted a civilian in charge of the military for reasons of appropriateness. The president also has another interesting feature in that the president is actually the chief diplomat of our country. We have the whole Secretary of State function, which has diplomats all over the world dealing with foreign countries. But they also all report to the president, and the president is the chief diplomat. When these other diplomats are negotiating with foreign countries, they will negotiate treaties, they will negotiate agreements, but nothing becomes official until the U.S. president gets involved and actually signs it. So the president is the chief diplomat of our country. The president can ask for tax increases. The president can ask for tax cuts. The president is responsible for putting together the budget. The president puts together a budget proposal and sends it over to Congress. And the Congress says, we don't like that, and they send back their own. And then every summer, we have what's called a budget battle in this country, where the president will submit his budget, Congress doesn't like it, and they spend all summer negotiating and arguing about what should actually be in the budget. But it has to start with the president submitting a budget, because that's his official administrative duty. If you want to analogize that, the same thing goes on at both the state level and the local level. Think of the city you live in. You have a city council, and you probably have a city manager. The city manager is the administrative person who puts together the budget and hands it to the city council. And then they will negotiate it and figure out what should really be in it, and then the council votes for it. That's the exact same thing which is happening at the federal level. The president is the administrator and puts together the budget, hands it over to Congress, then they fight about it, and they eventually agree what should be in it, and then Congress will approve it. The president is the chief administrator. Now, how do you get to be president? Obviously, that's considered the top job in our country, and obviously you have to run for it. And there's a long, involved process in becoming president of the United States. Because both major parties, Democrat and Republican, want obviously to elect the next president. And they have many people in their party who want to be president. both the major parties had a peculiar problem. With all those people in their party wanting to be president, they had to figure out a process to narrow that all down, to figure out what person would actually be on the ballot in a November election. So for purposes of the presidential election, both Democrats and Republicans had to devise a process to test these candidates and figure out who was most popular. And that's where we get something called the primary process. There's nothing in the Constitution about the primaries. The primaries are an invention of the two major political parties, because each party will have probably 10 people who want to run for president each cycle, but they can only have one person on the ballot in November. So they had to come up with a process to narrow down the 10 yappers to the one who will be on the ballot. And what did they do? By mutual agreement, the Democrat National Committee and the Republican National Committee said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start in January, and we're going to go throughout the 50 states, and we'll have individual elections in each state called primaries. And we'll keep track of who's been most popular throughout these. And these elections will last through June. So from January to June, they're having elections throughout the 50 states, trying to gauge who's the most popular candidate in their field. And then in the summer, in July and August, each party has a convention. And at that convention, they officially name the person who will be the candidate, because that was the person who survived the primary process. The primaries were designed by the parties to solve their problem. There's nothing in the Constitution about the primary process. It's solely an invention of Democrats and Republicans. Then once you get onto the ballot in November, then we have Election Day, where we all go vote. And then everybody thinks, okay, we elected a president. Well, that's just the beginning of the process, because you cast what is known as the popular vote on Election Day. The popular vote then translates to something called the electoral vote. The Electoral College then meets in December and solidifies your vote and makes real the popular vote. The popular vote leads to the electoral vote, and the electoral vote elects the president. That's the year-long process any person has to go through to become president. They got to go through the primaries in January through June. They got to go to convention in the summer. They got to go through the general election. Then they have to get through the electoral college. All that just to elect that one person. Compare that to Congress, where they just go through that one election in November, and they have their job. We put immense emphasis on the president because the president is one office holder in charge of the whole executive branch. And that vests in that one person an immense amount of authority. That's why we make the test for getting that job much harder than we make for either House or Senate. What are the age requirements? All these federal offices have age requirements. You will recall from the previous episode, you got to be 25 years old to be in the House, you got to be 30 years old to be in the Senate. What about to be president? What's the minimum age there? The age requirement to be president is 35 years old. And there's also another technicality. You have to be a natural-born citizen to be U.S. president. That differs from Congress. In Congress, you can be a natural-born citizen or you can be a naturalized citizen, meaning you're an immigrant and you became a U.S. citizen. But that doesn't work for the office of president. For the office of president, you have to be a natural-born citizen. Now, Congress and the president are always in contention, competing about policy issues. And the president is running the administrative side of the federal government. Congress is responsible for the legislative side. What happens when they really get at loggerheads and Congress is really upset with the president? Well, we talked about impeachment previously. And I said that no president has ever been removed through the impeachment process. And that is true. But let's look at another trivia question. How many presidents have been impeached? I will give you that answer shortly. The other element the president has to deal with is this whole element of war. Now, we've already established that Congress is responsible for declaring war, and that's true. The president, as the chief administrator and as the commander-in-chief, however, is responsible for making war and for the conduct of wars. The president can send troops anywhere he wants, anytime he wants, for any reason. That's his authority as commander-in-chief. And that's how, over the years, a lot of these skirmishes have become what we call wars, but they're never officially declared by Congress, because Congress doesn't want any part of them. So when you get a situation where a president is sending troops off to war, but it's not really an officially declared war by Congress, because Congress doesn't want to commit to it, that's kind of a gray area in our Constitution. And the presidents of all stripes have sent troops wherever they want, whenever they want, and created this issue. But Congress is also creating the issue by not committing to it. What they will do is vote to support the president in his mission, but they will never vote to declare war, because they don't want to officially be counted as declaring this if it goes badly. And that's the real politics of it. The question then becomes, if the president is sending somebody off to declare and fighting, and the Congress isn't really in favor of it, is there anything they can do to stop it? And there certainly is. Remember, they're the most powerful branch. And remember their number one superpower. Their number one superpower is to tax and to spend. And what is a war in the generic sense? A war is nothing but a government program. It's staffed by government employees and paid for by the federal government. How does the Congress end a federal program when they don't want it to exist anymore? They stop writing the checks. They zero it out. If Congress truly was interested in ever stopping a president from sending troops somewhere and starting a fight, they have a very simple recourse. They can just stop paying for it. It's very simple, and it's right there. But they don't do that, do they? They have never done that. They don't stop paying for it. They just let it keep going and keep complaining about it. That's the politics of war making in this country. If Congress really wanted to stop it when a president sent troops off somewhere, they just stop paying for it. But they don't. There are other issues involved, other political issues involved, which leads them to just let the war making keep going. That's why you have to have a president in place who isn't going to be prone to war making, will be first prone to peacemaking instead of war making. Okay. The trivia question. How many presidents in our history have been impeached? Remember, none have been removed from office, but how many have been impeached? The answer is 3. The presidents who have been impeached were President Johnson, President Clinton, and President Trump. Some of you may be saying, Lyndon Johnson wasn't impeached. You're right. That wasn't that Johnson. The President Johnson who was impeached was the president after Abraham Lincoln. He was very unpopular with Republican Congress, and they impeached him. So he was the first one, the one right after Abraham Lincoln. And then obviously President Clinton was impeached, and President Trump was impeached. But no one has ever been removed. Thank you for visiting the den for the 3rd episode in this series on Article 2, the presidency. See you next time.